In today's tutorial, we are going to be going through how you can create some insanely cinematic title animations. You can never really go wrong with that. Don't forget that you can get access to the project files for this project on my Patreon at patreon.com/Mapal, as well as previous projects. And this video is sponsored by Skillshare, but more on them later on. Now, the first animation we're going to be doing is taking inspiration from a hit show. I haven't watched it myself outside of some clips on Twitter, but it is The Bear. Now, I came across this animation on Behance, and it was just absolutely amazing. I love the way that they have kept it so simple, added just a little bit of texture and combined it with some real world footage to create a really unique piece. You can either go out and find some stock footage yourself, or you can learn how to make some yourself, and that's where today's video sponsor Skillshare comes into play. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creators, with classes on pretty much anything you can think of, whether that's animating, knitting, gardening, business, anything. They've got it. And all their classes are taught by industry professionals, so you know that you are in good hands no matter what you're interested in learning. Sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming when you're starting from square one, and that's where the learning paths are a great option for you. They guide you through the whole process of learning and building your confidence so that you, by the end of the learning path, is capable of going out on your own and creating some really cool stuff. Personally, I've been trying to get better at storytelling and writing. To help me improve, I've started on the creative essay writing, explore the personal and powerful learning path. However, if you're wanting to learn more about making videos or creating some stock footage like the stuff we're going to be using today, I highly recommend watching the video for social media, create to engage your audience learning path. Outside of the learning path, Skillshare has recently added some new categories which I think you'll be super interested in. The three new class topics are creative careers, creative inspiration, and AI and innovation. There are so many classes in these new categories that are useful no matter the stage of creation you're in, from idea generation to execution. Whether you're wanting to improve on your technical abilities or you want to focus more on the creative side of whatever you're doing, Skillshare has you covered. You can use my link in the description where the first 500 people to use the link will get our month free of Skillshare, so get started with learning today. Let's get back into actually making this bad boy cinematic title, which is inspired by The Bear. Now, I already have 3 compositions set up. I'm just gonna go into title number 1 because we are gonna be doing 3 things today, so strap in. But the first one, as I said, is inspired by The Bear, and we're gonna need some footage. Now, I've already got ahead and found some. Again, there's links to all of this in the description. What I'm gonna be using today, you can see it is from Artlist, but you know, you get the gist of it. Now, I don't know exactly how I'm going to position these clips, so we're just going to be going into this together. Now, I ideally want 2 or 3 clips, and I just want something that's kind of cinematic in the background. It's not the main piece. I just want it to make sense for the title that we're going to be doing. Now, I found these super sick clips of some painting, so that is what we are going to be using. Now, I've got some close-ups, and then I've got a wide angle, which I think we should end on. So I can start by dragging this wide angle and all of these clips, super big, super high res. I'm just going to scale these down to fit pretty well, and I want to make sure that I drag them into clips because that is what they are. So let's take this, and let's just put that in here and then scale these down to fit as well. Boom, 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 just scale until it looks pretty good. So let's say we have a little bit of this, and then right here, we will just cut that using our little Alt and right bracket, and then we can take this and trim it up so that it matches up. So we go from one clip to the next clip, and then let's say right about here, we want this to go into our wide angle shot. So we have something that looks kind of like this. Super simple. We're going to be adding some movement to this to actually make sense with the animation that we're going to be doing, but I just like having an idea of how long my animation is going to be since we're going to be adding some movement and cuts and stuff. All right, so I'm going to hit U just to hide that up and make sure I drag my clips into the clips, and now we can lay out our text. So obviously, inspiration from The Bear. This is not about a bear or a kitchen, so we're just going to go with something else like and I want to make sure I do it all caps so we kind of get the same style. Let's do The Artist. That'll work pretty well. I found this font, which is pretty nice. It's supposed to look kind of like, you know, the one in the show. And I'm just going to scale this up a good bit, decrease the tracking ever so slightly, increase the spacing between the 2 words, and then I just want to play around because this kerning is not very good for this font. So I'm just going to go in and do some manual adjustments so that it looks pretty even. You can see the spacing is a little bit better now. I want to scale this down a good bit, and I want to put all of this a little bit closer to each other. So just select all of that and just boom, like that. And let's just make sure all the kerning here looks pretty good. This looks like it needs a little bit less spacing here. And again, I mean, not that this is super important for creating the cinematic title, but it's always a good idea if you can see the kerning is a bit tough that you just go in and just add a little bit of correction to it so we don't get weirdly spaced letters. You do see that from time to time, and in my opinion, kills it. So now that we have that, we can center that bad boy up. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right click my text, and then I'm gonna go down into create, and I'm gonna create shapes from text. And then I'm gonna use this free plugin called Motion Tools, which you can download, link in the description. And I'm gonna use extract shapes, which is just gonna take all the shapes within that shape layer and put them into their own layers so it's easier to animate and play around with. So it's just flexibility. One thing I do wanna do is color code these. So let's make the different color, and the artist, we can keep that blue. But essentially what we want here is on our full screen, I don't want the to be on there. I just want it to be artist. So I'm just gonna take all of these, I'm gonna go one frame back and actually just make sure I pick the right letters, and then alt bracket since it cuts the frame after, so we have that right in there. And I can take the last artist, which is right in the middle, I can duplicate that, Shift Command D to split the layers and duplicate the other half. And I'm just gonna add a null to this so that we can work, and I'm just using Void, another free plugin, pretty neat, but I'm just gonna move this up to center it up, and you could visually center this too. I just like having that void in there so it's easier to control, but that is pretty good. And I'm just gonna change the color of all of this to something completely different, like green. So boom, and hide that grid again. So now we have this final bit, which is boom, and now we can work on animating this. What we wanna do here is really pretty simple. We have some offsetting movement, which we are gonna add a little bit of extra flair to with the clips in the background. So for now, I'll just focus on the text itself, and then we can work on the background movement to match it up and down. So let's just take all of these, bada bam, bada boom, and I'm just gonna hit P for position, and I'm actually just gonna cut it right here. So I'm just gonna duplicate all of this as a matter of fact, boom, and drag this up so that we have letters for each clip, sorta. And I'm just gonna change the color of this again so we know what is what. So this one, let's make it pink, and this we can make cyan, sure, that'll work. So for this first bit, we wanna have the letters come in, and I'm just gonna take all these layers, hit P to open the position, go forward about 12 frames, set a keyframe, and I'm gonna move backwards, and I'm just gonna move these up and down kind of how I see fit, like that, just so we get some counter movement. You can see it kind of come in a little bit, boom. And then we have the, of course, and I think for the, we're just gonna hit P and keyframe that position, and then we are just gonna move these up so that they come down, and then we'll just offset it just a little bit. You can move these forward just a little bit so that they come down as that kind of settles in so they don't overlap too much. So we have that coming in, and then we're gonna make sure that we have the animation that transitions into the second scene, which the second scene will also have some movement. So from here, we'll just go forward a little bit, just maybe even drag this out a little bit more so we get more of a continuous motion. So about halfway, and then go towards the end. And then for this, we will just take this and we will move it up like that. And then for the letters, so they came in, we have the A coming down. So this time we want to keep that movement going, and then we'll just do the opposite for all of this, like that. Then we can take all these keyframes, select them all, and move them over. And we can just select all these keyframes, and we'll hit F9 to ease them. And the easing is going to be super simple. I'm going to take all the keyframes on the left and move them over to the left so they start a lot faster. And then take the middle ones and push them out to the left, and then the same on the other side, but this time to the right, so that they have a lot of movement coming in and a lot of movement coming out, so they kind of get a little bit of like a still stand in the middle. So if we play that back, we get something that looks kind of like that. And you can accentuate or you can stop it from going completely still if you zoom in, and let's just zoom in here. And you can lift all of these keyframes off the ground, so if you just move it up ever so slightly, so now we just have the T. I'm just gonna solo it to really show it. So by that, you see it never really stops, so it keeps that momentum flowing. So that is what we're gonna do with every single one. We're just gonna lift it ever so slightly off the ground, and I'm just gonna hold shift to make sure that the keyframe stays on the frame that I actually want it to be. But just lift it off ever so slightly, boom. So now if I unsolo that one and play that back, we can now see that they all come down and just keep on going, which is super, super neat. We might adjust the timing of this a little bit so that the goes out just a little bit quicker, and we can just cut that as soon as that comes in. So it comes in, boom, and goes straight back up. And this is just about finessing it just a little bit until you dial in the look completely. But that is pretty much the first bit. So we have that coming in, coming out, and then we want to keep that movement going. So on this one, we'll do pretty much the same thing, but this time we don't want to animate it out. We just want it to come in. We don't have to do the same exact movement, but it's a good idea just because it helps keep that movement flowing. So we can take all of these, again, we'll hit P, go forward a little bit to about right there, then keyframe it, go back to the beginning, and we can see the R is down below. So we can just move that up, move this down, move this up, move this down, move this up, and move this down. We just want to vary it just a little bit like that. Again, we can just hit F9 to ease these keyframes, and we're going to do the same thing where we just take the motion, move it all the way to the left so it comes in with a lot of movement here, and let's just hide all of that. And then the next thing will be the text, which this time I think we'll just do a little bit of like a tracking almost. So I'm going to hit P and keyframe this, just move this forward a little bit. And then right here, I'm just gonna move this out just a little bit, boom, and just slide this bit of movement to the H. And again, F9, same type of easing that we're gonna be doing here. Take all of this, move it out to the left, and all this, move it out to the left as well. A lot of impact, and we can just cut these layers right here. So now we get something that looks kind of like this. And then we have the artist at the very end. Now the transition between this and this is going to be a slight zoom transition. What we can do is take all of these and let's just go right before it ends, and I'm going to add a void, which is essentially a null, nothing fancy there, but we just want to take this and let me just take these voids, and we're just going to hit S to bring up the scale. This is a pretty fun one. We're just going to start right here, keyframe the scale, and go forward a little bit and just scale it up a good bit, boom. And the same with this one up here, we're just going to keyframe it. And this time we'll do the opposite, so it ends at the scale we actually want it to be. I'm gonna go back and I'm just gonna scale that down a little bit. Boom, boom, boom. We can take all these keyframes and we are just gonna hit F9. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit of, I'm just gonna push them in just a little bit here so that the most movement is right in the middle, which is gonna help sell the transition between the two a little bit. I'm just gonna drag these out a little bit. So now we get something that looks kind of like this. So a nice, simple little cut. And we're gonna accentuate this a lot more once we actually get to playing around with the punch-ins and all that stuff. But it gives us a foundation of movement. Now this looks a little bit plain. So what we're gonna do to spice up our background images a little bit is add motion tile, which essentially is kind of like Reptile, except you just do it on the frame itself. So it's kind of like this film roll almost. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go to one of my layers here. I'm gonna hit U to know where my keyframe is. And I'm just gonna move the frame here, so maybe that'll be where it ends. Keyframe the tile center, and I'm gonna go to the beginning, and I'm just gonna drag this down a little bit so we have it comes down, and then we're gonna go the opposite way. Gonna go back up a little bit as we transition into the next. Hit U, and let's just take these keyframes and ease them by hitting F9. Same sort of concept here. Take these, move them out a little bit. Boom. Take this, move that way, and this, and that way, and so now we have something that looks like this. Just adds a little bit of that movement to it, which spices it up a whole lot. Not a whole lunch, a whole bunch. I'm sounding real big backed right now. But then again, we want to continue this movement into the next scene. So let's say we start down a little bit here, and we're just going to keyframe the tile center. So here, the last movement we go is up. So what I'm gonna do here is I am gonna go forward a little bit and I am gonna go up until we get a nice little cut. And then for this, I am gonna go back down. So kind of like almost like a stutter here, boom. And I'm gonna hit U to bring up my keyframes for this one. I'm gonna hit F9 and I'm just gonna make sure this keyframe goes into the last frame, select them. And same principle here, we wanna take them and move them out to the sides. So the first two scenes look something like this. Now, all we really have left is this final scene, which we're just gonna keep it at a still stand like that. We don't need to, I don't have any need to really animate this because I want it to be more of a calm feeling towards the end when we get the full title. But what we can do is take all of this, I'm gonna take all my text here, and I'm gonna pre-comp it, and I'm just gonna name this title 1 pre, and now let's just copy that, boom, and boom. So this first one, I wanna scale up a lot here. And you can enable collapse transformations or continuously rasterize. Since we are working with shapeless, we can scale this up however much we want without it taking damage, aka getting pixelated. So we can have it nice and big here, boom. And for this one, You can leave it like that, and then this one I actually want to scale up a good bit here, like that. So now we get something that looks like this. Super simple, super effective, and we can even go last bit here, and let's just cut that and scale this down so we can see the full title here. And again, you can just do a simple scale animation to both of these to kind of cut it up a little bit without it being an actual cut. So just keyframe both of the scale on these. Then on this one, we want it to shrink downwards, so we'll just set this to 120. And this one, we want to move this keyframe over here, this one over here, and just go down a little bit, so maybe 170. Select these keyframes, F9, then we can go in and we can drag them towards the middle of one another. So hold shift, drag this out to right about there, drag this out to right about there, just until it's right in the middle there. So we get the most movement right in the middle, or the fastest movement, I should say. And then we can take these keyframes, we'll stretch them out a little bit, and then we just want to make sure they are lined up right in the middle of the composition or timeline here, so we have that slight movement in. And you can even stretch this out a little bit more, so it's not too drastic. And that is pretty much it for this little text animation. However, there is a tiny bit of stylization we can add to it like they have it, but that's it for the motion itself. To add a little bit of that blur feel to it, which is some of the stylizing they have in there, I'm gonna go into the pre-comp in here and I'm gonna create a shape layer here, and I'm actually just gonna use my pen tool and I'm just gonna change it to a black. And then I'm gonna hide I'll make it transparent real quick, and I just want to focus on the bottom here. I'm just going to get kind of a blobby shape here towards the bottom of it, and then I'm also going to make one towards the top here, which is just going to go nicely, boom. And to these two layers, I'm just going to add fast box blur and increase that a little bit, boom. Copy it and paste it onto that. And we can take these two layers, and I'm just going to pre-comp them and name this blur mask pre, and add a solid composite, which is going to give us a white background, and we can hide this. And then I'm going to add an adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a camera lens blur. And let me just enable the background again so we can kind of see what we're doing here. But I'm going to choose my blur mask pre and go to effects and mask, and now you can see we get a little bit of that blur. I'm just going to invert it so it's the blacks that determine where the blur is. You can play around with how blurry you want this to be. I just want ever so slightly, and that looks pretty good. Then we can go back into our main composition here, and you can kind of see it a little bit. Again, if you do it this way, you can see it will kind of affect the background as well, since we have collapse transformations thingamajig on, which is, you know, up to you. You can pre-comp it and just hit OK, and then that won't be a problem. So you only get it on that specific thing, but it's just an extra pre-comp type of thing that you have to do. But that looks pretty good to me. That's a nice little intro title type thing, just some super simple animation. Nothing you can really go wrong with. Now we can hop on to the second one, which is inspired by the show called 1883 or 1923 or Yellowstone, whatever you want to call it. They are all the same universe. They all have the same creator. They look very similar stylistically. But the reason why I want to do this one is because it's a great way to practice your feel for textures and layering them in an interesting way to create a unique look. Now, this is more than just overlaying textures on top of some text. We'll be masking, cutting, and also putting them into 3D space to create a little bit of like a parallax aquarium type look, which is super sick. But again, we're going to be needing a bunch of assets, which I've already gone ahead and found. There will be a link to all of these down below as well, but we will have a sip of coffee and then we will get cracking. First thing I'm going to do is hit Command Y to create a solid background. And I'm just going to make this like a dark grayish. I just have 1111 here. That'll work completely fine. You can also go black, it doesn't really matter. You can always change it later on depending on what you want, but I'm just going to name this BG because that is what it is. I want to make sure my layers are organized. Boom. So I'm just going to drag in my pre-comps down in here. Nice and organized. That means that if we are working with somebody else, nice and easy for them to work with as well. Now we're going to start with our text, which is going to be the title of our thing. Now I wasn't born in 1883, nor has any of my life happened in 1883, but 1998, that's when I was born. So we can definitely use that. Now I want to find the font that fits with this. I'm just going to go base of the style. I want something distorted. I want something eroded, something with some edge and character to it. And I have found this font called Wild Rodeo, which is beautiful. So I'm just going to space this out a little bit and make sure that it's centered up nice and well. And it has some really cool characters to it. I want to take this 8 and just bring it in just a little bit because it looks a little bit far away compared to the rest of the letters. So I think that looks a little bit better. Maybe take this 9 in a little bit as well. Like that. I think that's pretty good. And we can just center that up and scale it up however big you want. You want it to be pretty in there, but you can always change that later on as well. Now we can start building the look that we want. And this is gonna take a lot of layers. Next up, let's get some film textures in here. And again, I just wanna add a hue and saturation just in case it really hurts nobody. I wanna scale this bad boy down a little bit and get some of that nice kind of bleach look almost. I don't really know what it is, but it looks pretty cool, so I'm digging it. And again, I just wanna cycle through this until I see something that catches my eye. Like this, you get a little bit of both textures in there, which I just think looks super cool. And you can always add a Lumetri color as well. So this feels pretty bright to me, but if I add a Lumetri color and then go into the exposure, and I can just drag that down, and then we get a little bit more of that contrast in there. You can add just a little bit of color correction to it to really bring out the whites and the grunginess in it. So take a lot of time in playing around with these textures. Now, I know this one is super sweet, and this is what I said, like this looks pretty much black and white, but you can see it just has a little bit of color tint in there. So we want to get rid of that, and I'm just going to increase that to fit my composition here and unlink that because I don't mind stretching this just a little bit. You know, sometimes we can stretch, you know, it's fine, but add a hue and saturation, just remove that all the way, and then let's just play with the blending modes a little bit to get that nice white distortion in the corners here. I think that looks so sweet. This one is also just has a lot of characteristic to it. This one I might even put in the back, you know, you just play around with it. It ain't gonna hurt nobody. And then again, you can see this one is green, hue and saturation, take this one down, and you can cycle through all of these blend modes pretty quickly by holding shift and just going through. Something like that might look pretty good. You can even take the opacity and just decrease it a little bit. Boom, you can rotate it around until you get something that you feel looks pretty good. So like this, so we just get a little bit of color down there, not only over there. Then we have something like this rust, which I think is a very nice touch. And I just want to scale this down actually a little bit and maybe have some blotches out and around here, over in the corner over here maybe, like that. So I'm just going to take the pen tool and I'm just going to mask out a little bit here, like that. And then we can open up the masks and open it up once again and just add a little bit of feather to it and cycle through the blend modes and see what we have to work with. So I just want a little bit of that color in there if we can. You know, something like that looks pretty good. Decrease the opacity of it a little bit, but that just adds a little splash of some grunge in there, which is super nice in my opinion. We just want to drag that below this over the top film thing. I want to keep that at the very front since it's some nice like texture on the edges of it. Just adds a little bit of something. We can even duplicate this and let's just turn it back to normal and hit M to open up the mask and just delete that and maybe find something else that we want, like maybe down here in the corner, maybe a little bit of this. So just hit G and I'm just gonna mask this around. Boom. Again, go into the masks and add some feather to it. And then we know this is the same as the other one. So vivid light works pretty well. And just decrease the opacity of this bad boy a little bit. So it's just a little bit of color in there, but it adds to that grunginess of it. Last bits that I want to add in terms of the textures is some particles, and some fog. And we're just going to drag all this in. Just going to take this and let's just set this all to screen. That should show us everything that's behind, and we can just hide all this for now. So the smoke here, let's scale this bad boy down a little bit, and we can move this over until we get something that we like pretty good. And I'm just going to put this in the background and maybe decrease the opacity of it just a little bit. I just want it to be very slight here in the background, very slow moving. Then we can take the particles. We have this bigger one, which I'm gonna put behind the smoke. And again, take the opacity of it down a little bit, and I'm just gonna decrease the size of it just a smidge, and we have it moving around there. And then we have some smaller ones in the foreground, and we'll just scale that down to fit here. Something like that looks pretty good. And again, just put it behind that border, but in front of everything else. And now we just have some nice particles moving in there, which just adds a little bit of movement to something that's all otherwise very stationary. Last but not least, for the background, or the texture that we're going to be doing, is adding a splotch thing. I think this one would work pretty good. And it's just to add to a little bit of that almost bleachy look almost. And I'm just gonna put this, scale it down just a little bit like that. Have that start right about here. Just very, very slow moving. And we can change the blend mode of this. I'm just gonna move this behind everything except for our lost texture. And I'm just gonna cycle through the blend mode, see if anything, you know, looks super cool. So darken actually looks pretty cool. You can see it almost like it takes out a little bit of that smoke, which is just a very interesting look. But I might just reduce the opacity of it just a little bit so it's not as drastic, but we get that nice little bit of movement in there. Just something super sweet, super simple. Now all that's left is adding some animation to our text and then doing the parallax effect. So for the text, I'm actually gonna pre-comp this and I'm just gonna name this 9098 pre. That's completely fine. And what we're gonna be doing here is adding some ink splashes again, just some very, very simple ones. We'll just take these 3 in, boom, and I'm just gonna hide 2 for now. Take this first one, maybe scale it up a little bit and have that kind of come in here, boom. I think that's pretty good. Then we can take the second one. Let's have a look at this one, maybe scale it up a little bit and move that down this way. And move this up just a little bit like that. And then last but not least, let's say about right here, we can take this big one and put it in here so that it comes in. Let's move it up a little bit like that, but maybe actually take the scale and just do minus. So we flip it and something like that might look pretty good. And maybe rotate it just a little bit like that and move it over this way. And now we can take a white layer here and I'm just gonna make a white background. Hit OK, move that to the bottom here and just take these 3 and change the blending mode to multiply so that we just get only the black colors so they all overlay nice and evenly. Take all these 3, pre-comp this and just name this ink matte pre, and then we're just gonna track matte it to that and change it to a luma matte and then invert it. So now it's the black that determines where the color goes. Now the second one is maybe a little bit too drastic. Maybe fade this in just a little bit from down here. Let's go in and have a look at what this looks like now. So I think that's pretty good. It's good to me. And then we can close all this up, go back into Title 2, and now we have something that looks like this. Nice little reveal here. And now comes the fun part. So I'm gonna right click, new and camera. And I'm just gonna add a simple camera. Focus or f-stop doesn't matter too much. 80, 50, whatever works pretty good. I'll just go 50, that's what I usually work with. And then we can take all these layers and put them into 3D space. Then we're gonna go to 2D mode, and I should say I'm working in classic 3D because you don't need any of the fancy stuff. You just want some simple stuff. I'm gonna take my camera. I'm just gonna move it out a little bit to give us more space to work with here. Move it out a little bit, and then we can start working from wherever we want. So actually, this very first one, I don't need to have in 3D space because I want it to be at the edge of the composition the whole time. So we can take this, let's move this forward a little bit, since this is our foremost layer, and I just want to make sure this is lined up with the edge of the composition pretty much. And then we can take the second one, move that out a little bit this way, and then we just want to scale that up a little bit like that. And take this other one and scale this up too a little bit and move that forward. We can always mess around a little bit with the position afterwards as well. Then take this next layer, move that forward and scale it up to fit the whole composition here. Same with this one. Actually, we'll just leave that one in the middle. Move our 1998 back a little bit. Same with all of this. So we don't need that to be 3D at all. So move this all back a little bit and we can start moving this forward. So I'll take this and I want to scale this up. Maybe move that up a little bit and boom. Move this forward a little bit. Scale that up and move this forward a little bit. Scale that up. So as you can see, I'm just trying to make sure that they all are out, like they all fit within the composition here. And the same with this back here. Move that, scale that up big time. Take this, we can scale this up a little bit. So we forgot this one. We want to take this one and scale that up too, obviously, so we don't get that weird edge. And then what we're going to do from here is take the camera. We'll go to the very beginning and keyframe the position, and we'll just move this forward. So we'll just move this forward just a little bit. Doesn't have to be a whole lot of movement in here. And just like that, we just get a little bit of that parallax movement. Super simple, super sweet. Just a nice little bit of way to add just a little bit of depth to a scene. We can stylize it a little bit. One thing I like to do is go into the text And then if I just go forward so we can actually see the text is adding, essentially what it is a turbulent displace. And then I set the first one to 8x8. And then in the evolution options, I alt click the random seed and let's just do a posterized time, set that to 3. And then I'm just gonna do a random expression and set that to a very high number. So we just get a little bit of movement in the texture of the text. I typically duplicate this and then I set it to something like 30x2, so it's a little bit rougher around the edges, and that just gives us some nice texture in it, so it looks a little bit hand-drawn. And let's just go in here, and you can play around with the blending mode of this as well to give you just a little bit of texture here. So something like linear dodge, just to give a little bit of that texture there. Looks super nice, super sweet. Last but not least, add some posterized time to this. I'll do a 12 typically. Below that and above the camera, I add another adjustment layer and I add a transform effect and set the scale to something like 102 just to get a little bit of breathing room so we don't see any edges covered. And then I alt click the position, posterized time, something like 6 or 12. Either one works pretty good. You can even do nothing if you want a more handheld feeling, but do something like a wiggle, and then we'll do 1,10, which is just gonna give us a little bit of that hand camera movement, which is just super sweet. Just like that, we have something that looks kind of like this. You can see it just has a little bit of that sway movement to it, which is just super nice. But a lot of different textures that we've layered, you can space them out even more. You can do whatever you want. You can create exactly whatever you want. It's just about layering them to create a certain look and then putting it all together to make it make sense. You can always go in afterwards, add some grain, add some contrast, play around with the colors and stuff like that. But this is a great way to get started and to practice your feel for layering textures instead of doing a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't end up looking good. So practice this and you will be able to create some really sick title animations. Time for the third and final title animation that we're gonna be doing today. This one is kind of inspired by something I saw on Behance as well. I love browsing on there for inspiration, but I thought it was a great example of how we can use text and add some very simple animation that you can do regardless of your level to create something that looks super sick. And I hope you're starting to sense a little bit of a theme because all of these are really simple in the way that they are animated. It's not a lot of crazy animations or bouncers or anything like that. It's just about layering small little bits of animation and really tinkering with those animations to create something that feels organic and smooth, but it's super simple because at the end of the day, it's a title animation. We want to be able to read it. So, you know, it really has to be simple in order to be good. Now this one is sexy because it adds a lot of texture and some really simple animation principles that I think anyone can do and anyone should be able to do. And if you are beginning, you should strive to be able to do something like this. So I'm gonna start again by creating a solid. We're just gonna create a dark gray here. Boom, bada bing, bada boom. We're gonna add some text. I'm just gonna name this motion graphics. This font is sick, by the way. But what we're gonna do here is do Ivy. This one, I think, that looks pretty good. Just a simple, clean little font here. And I should just go ahead and select my all caps because that is the look that I'm going for. And I'm just gonna decrease that a little bit, boom, and center that up. So this is our base text. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and right click, then I'm gonna go down into create shapes from text, and then I'm gonna use the extract feature of the motion tools plugin. Now we have a whole bunch of shapes and we have to animate it somehow. It's actually a lot easier than you might think. You can do something as simple, and this is where the inspiration comes from, is taking the letters and playing with them and the position that they are laid out in. So let's take some of these letters, for example. We can stack them and create something that just looks a little bit interesting, but let's take the M and the O and the T here. So if we go forward a little bit to about 2 frames, I'm gonna hit P, keyframe the position. Now we can go forward a little bit to, let's say, 20 frames. And actually, let's open up the scale too and keyframe the scale for both of these because we are gonna be playing with that as well. But now we can scale these down, and I just wanna make sure they're about 50-ish% maybe. And I'm gonna move this one up, and I'm gonna move this one down. I'm gonna hit Command R to bring up my rulers, and I just wanna make sure that this is lined up with the top and the bottom so that we keep some nice, you know, we don't want it to look all wacky, but that should be pretty good. And then we can move this over, boom, and we might wanna scale this down a little bit more just to give us some breathing room between the letters so they're not, you know, merged together. And as you can see, we typically want the O to go a little bit above because that's just optical how you would do it. So this looks pretty good. We can take these and we'll just move these closer to the M over here like that. And we can take all these letters up here actually. Boom, hit P, and we just want to keyframe the position over here of all of them. And then move forward, and then we can move these. We'll take these letters and move them closer to this over here. And we just want to keep in mind the kerning of this a little bit. Take all of this, open up my grid, and center that up. So now we have something that looks like that. And now we have something that looks like this. Now this is not the greatest animation. You have it kind of crossing over. So what we can do is we can change the animation or the order of the animation a little bit to make it a little bit smoother and snappier. So we don't actually need this whole animation. We can take all this, and I'm just going to hit F9 to ease it. And then I am just going to take all of these and just move it towards the middle here. Boom, boom, so that most of the movement is right in the middle. So we have just a little bit of snappier movement, but not snappy enough. So what I'm going to do is actually take the scale animations first, and I'm just going to move them over a little bit. So we have them scaling down like that. As they are scaling down like that, we can cut the layers. I'm just going to split them right here and move them up. And I'm just going to hit U, and then take the scale animations of these two new ones. I'm just going to move it over so that the scale animation has already happened by the time they go over. So they're already stacked here, and then we want the position pretty much to do the same thing. So you get a little bit of that movement there, and we just want this bit of the movement animation, so we can take these layers and trim them up, and then if we move these over, we now have something that looks kind of like this. It's snappy, it's quick, you just get a little bit of the sense of both of them. So you get the scale, and you get the movement, but it's snappy. So now the last bit is the rest of the text coming into where it needs to be. So let's take all of this and just move it over a little bit. And we just want to line this up so that they kind of go in here, boom, maybe even move it over one like that. And that right there, if I play this back, and I obviously want to take these two layers and just extend it out, and the same with these two, bada bam, bada boom, take this. And now playing that back, we just get a little bit of some snappy motion. And you can do this with more letter pairs like the H and the I, the P and the A. You can pick whatever you want. It's the principle on how you treat the text and attack it. This is super, super simple, which is what you want with a title animation. You want something that's very, very simple. And you also want something that's readable, legible, and has a little bit of character to it. This has all of it. So the rest really comes down to styling. And again, one thing that I think would work really well for something like this, where it's a little bit rough, you can kind of sense that it is a little bit on the rougher side in terms of the snappiness and stuff. It's not an elegant animation necessarily, is taking all this. We'll just pretend we've animated all this text for the sake of the tutorial. We named this title 3 pre, and we're going to add the turbulent displace once again. And actually, we don't even have to do all of that one more time. We can just go in here, boom, boom, copy these two, boom, and go into title 3, delete that one, paste this, and now we have just a little bit of that texture on there. Super, super sweet. Then right here, as it cuts, let's say right here, I'm gonna add an adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add invert like that, and I'm just gonna trim that layer right there so that with the movement coming in, you get an invert effect that snaps kind of similarly to the rest of the animation. So it matches, it gives it a little bit of character, makes it a little bit more interesting. Now we wanna add an adjustment layer, and this time we're going to add a transform effect to add a little bit of camera shake. Not the same as we just did. Again, we want to take the scale, move it up to 102, something like that. Alt click the position. This time I am going to add a post-rest time 100%. Set that to like 3 to slow it down a good bit. And I'm going to add a wiggle expression 222, 2, and that's just going to give us a little bit of wiggle in here, just a slight bit of character. I really don't want it to be too quick. And then I'm going to add a post-rest time effect at the top of everything because that is going to fit the style, and that is essentially what we're going for. As you've seen with all of these, it's a style and a look you're building. You want it to match and feel, and it all depends on the project you're working with. Like this would not work the same with the images we have in the first one. So it's all about matching the style that you're working with. So this does feel like it needs a little bit more texture, doesn't it? So we can go ahead and add a grain effect. And again, I'm just going to create a solid and set that to 80, 80, 80, which is middle gray. And I'm just going to name this grain. I'm going to add the add grain effect and change it to final output. One of the codec presets, let's do 250D. Sure, why not? Set the intensity 1.3 and the same with the size. Application, change it to film, and then add a tint effect. Boom. And I like to pre-comp this and just name this grain pre. Easy to stay organized this way, use it across multiple things, and I'm gonna change it to a linear light, not an overlay, because this is gonna give us more texture in there. Just decrease the opacity a little bit. You can see the difference in linear light and overlay. So it's a lot more strong in this, and I'm gonna drag that below all these adjustment layers, except for the invert, of course, and also just drag it above the camera movement. And then we can add some particles. Again, create a solid. It doesn't matter what color it is this time. We're just gonna name this particles. And we're gonna add a fractal noise to this and just keep it at all the basic settings. You can increase the complexity, whatever. You definitely wanna increase the brightness and the contrast. And you just wanna play around with this as well as the transform until you get some small speckles here. So maybe increase that a little bit, take that down. We just want a few faint speckles here. That might even be too much here. Maybe scale that up a little bit. Something like that might be pretty good. And then we can go into the evolution options. And again, we are just gonna use a random expression. You can set it to something like posterize 6, and then a random, just whatever high number you can pick. And you can even select cycle evolutions, which is, just a nice little way you can make it loop kind of. But now we get a little bit of that particle. If you want to slow it down even more, you'll just change the posterized time expression. So 3 slows it down a good bit more. You can hit U, and then you can just change it to, let's do a screen here. Really nice. And if you place it below the invert, maybe just like that, we get black particles on the white background and white particles on the black background. Genius IQ instead of 2 different ones. And just like that, we have a super sexy, simple, textured animation. What more can you ask for? So let's have a look at this real quick. Boom. And let's play that on repeat. Such a simple little animation. It looks good, it feels good, it just makes you happy. But that is pretty much it for this look right here. That is as simple as it gets with some really, really nice and beautiful texture. And you can use this a gazillion times in a project because it's so simple, it's snappy, it has good pacing. You can't go wrong with this really. So, play around with it. All 3 of them actually, play around with them, have some fun. They're all great examples of how you can spice up a project. I hope you learned something new. Hopefully you feel inspired to go out and create some sick title cards on your own. If you watch these videos, you know I'm a big fan of title cards, so this really hits home. But outside of that, make sure you check the link in the description to check out Skillshare if you're interested in learning some more about pretty much anything. It's free. You might as well. You can never go wrong with that. It's good to keep learning. But thank you. Make sure to check out the Patreon if you're interested in any of the project files. Patreon.com/Mapal. And outside of that, like, comment, subscribe, I suppose, and put down in the comments if you have any suggestions for what you would like to see. And with that being said, peace out.